handout is linked in the description box, so make sure you get that. So today we're going to talk about copyright. I think that copyright is misunderstood when it comes to genealogy research. Tell me, if you're watching this live, tell me in the chat, have you attended copyright webinars, and what is your takeaway from that? Do you feel encouraged? Do you feel discouraged? Do you feel confused? Let me know. If you're watching the replay, play along as well. Tell me when you've attended copyright sessions, what was your takeaway? My hope today is that you will feel encouraged and that you will get motivated to write your stories. And hopefully give you a little bit of clarification. I'm going to always say, when in doubt, keep researching to find the right answer for what you can and cannot use in your projects. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. That's what we need to do. All right, so family history should strive to share memories and stories with our families. That's what we're writing. We can build a family tree, and that's lovely, but being able to share the stories can really draw our relatives in. I know that by writing my personal memoir that you see there on the left, From Metal to Rhinestones, I have a second part that I need to write when I stop having a business. But when I wrote that, there was a lot of insight into who I was and my history, and a number of people really appreciated that in my family. I wrote the middle scrapbook, so writing your family history doesn't have to be a huge project. This was a scrapbook and to honor my grandma, Louise, and so my surviving great aunts, or not great aunts, but they are great, and they're aunts. So my mom has passed away, and she had two sisters, and they just adore this scrapbook featuring all the different memories of their mother. And then the last book that I'm showing you right there, not the last book I've written, just the last one in the display, that's actually a biography about a man in which I had 4 documents to document his life. And then I had to add so much historical context. Maybe in the future I'll find some more records about him, but it's a 90-page book based on 4 documents and a lot of social history. That book in particular is one that I had to learn about copyright for. What can I put in because of the need to quote other sources, use images from other locations. And then in my Metal to Rhinestones, we should be talking about that later in this presentation, I also had some other photographs, because if you're participating in pageants, you're going to be having photographs taken by others. What can you use? What can't you use? And I believe I covered that process that I went through in this. Thanks, Patricia. Glad to see you here. You did love that book. And what was really funny, I think you're one of the people that said, when I started reading this book, I heard your voice all the way through. And whenever you're writing your memoir and you're wondering what voice should I use, you should use your voice. And that, I believe that was the compliment you gave me. So let me check on a few of the comments here that you guys said about taking copyright classes. Encouraged by copyright after several webinars. So notice you had to attend several webinars in order to feel accomplished. And I hope that I can add to that. I hate to say this, but got a good nap during my copyright class. Well, if you need to take a nap, I hope that you will come back and finish watching this video and I don't put you to sleep. I like this one. Since I'm a retired librarian, I've heard about copyright for many years. It sometimes still confused me. I love your honesty right there. Right? You've talked about copyright in your profession, and yet there's still elements that confuse you. I hope to clarify that today. Just a minute. My allergies are going crazy. All right, so Stacy is adding anything before 1925 is fair game, and it's probably better to get permission than to ask for forgiveness in situations. Now, that is great. We'll be talking about the years and getting permissions and stuff through the session. So let's go ahead and keep going. All right. So each country, this is one that comes to be problematic. Each country has its own set of laws governing whether or not you can use someone else's creation in a project of your own making. In the United States, we call this copyright. In other states, it's called something else. If you are from another state, would you enlighten the audience, either the live audience or the replay, and tell me what it's called in your state? That would be great. So here is what the United States defines as, I think I have some music going on. I need to stop that. Oh, sorry about that. I didn't know the music was still going on. All right, so this is, I need to show you the slide. I took myself off for a moment. All right, so whoops. Okay. I had originally planned to be up there in the upper right corner. So for the future class, I will be up there in that circle. But anyway, it's live. You catch these things live. It always happens. Anyway, so U.S. Copyright Office defined copyright in this way: a form of intellectual property law that protects the original works of an author, including literary, dramatic, musical, artistic works such as poetry, novels, movies, songs, computer software, and architecture. Copyright does not protect facts, ideas, systems, or methods of operation, although it may protect the way things are expressed. Hold on a second. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. So, what stands out to you in that statement? The first, copyright is designed to protect the works of authorship. So when an author or a creator puts something together, copyright is designed to protect their work, right? But copyright does not protect facts. And that is super important in the genealogy industry, because we deal with a lot of facts, and many people start arguing, wait, you can't take that because I found it. Well, if it's a fact, you can't copyright facts. So let's go over what that means. So what facts can you not copyright? Someone's birth date, someone's death date, the locations in which events take place. And you don't need to seek permission when you mention the title of an author or work. So if you are going to mention that you found a quote that you really like said by Devin Lee in From Metal to Rhinestones, you don't have to get copyright's permission to say there's a really great quote in Devin's book. The copyright comes into play when you want to quote my book or take something from that book. But we cannot copyright the events and the dates associated with our ancestors' life. I'm going to go ahead and pull this question in. What is the distinction between citation and copyright? All right, that is a great question. Copyright deals with what you can and cannot use and how much you can use of somebody else's work. And that is what we're going to cover a bunch today. Citation is when you tell people where you give credit to the source in which you used. Does that make sense? So copyright deals with the content, and citation references people to the original content. And we'll talk about how to do that in the future. I've starred that for later use to ensure that I come back and make sure that we cover it if I didn't. But if you're watching this presentation live, be like Stacy, drop a question anytime you think of it. Sometimes I'll work it in, sometimes I'll save it for the end. If you're watching this webinar later, then please go ahead and drop any of your questions. I will be responding to them. I'm going to Roots Tech next week, so I might not be able to get to them within the next week, but before 2 weeks have passed, I'll be able to get to your question. After Roots Tech, it will be pretty regular, so go ahead and drop your questions anytime you think of them. Okay, I'm going to go here. All right. So if you have a statement in a book that looks like this, notice it's not copyright protected. According to his journal, see, we can reference a journal. 1920, Richard emigrated from England to the United States in March of 1912 on board the U.S. Olympic, and then it identifies the 3 people in which he traveled from. All of that is facts. We have a name of a person. We have a date. You can't copyright dates. He was on a ship. Okay, well, that's a location. You can't copyright locations. Um, and then you're referencing that was in a journal. Now, bringing back Stacy's question, of course, you want to cite where you got that information because that's what good genealogists do. We always cite where we get information. But I can take those facts right there and put them in my story, and I am not violating copyright because these are facts. Okay, I'm checking something. Now, if you were to enhance these facts in the way I teach you in the book, A Recipe for Writing Family History, or using some of the other videos that I have here on this channel, these facts would then become literature because you're taking as facts, you're adding social context or societal historical context into it and making it more than just a list of facts. In that case, that becomes copyrightable. And so if that makes sense, let me know in the chat. If you're watching live, go ahead and say, yes, that makes sense, or no, I need some more clarification. Now, consider for a moment how much of what you use in genealogy research is available for you to use in your genealogy projects when you absorb the fact that facts are not copyrightable by US copyright law. It's a considerable amount. But when do people start arguing? Well, when I start sharing my tree with you, if you take my facts and don't credit me, some people can be frustrated, but that's a matter of credit and citation. It's not a matter of copyright if it's just the facts. But your notes, your stories, your analysis, all of that is yours. And so that's when that should help us understand how much more we can actually use and not have to worry about copyright. Okay, Barbara just asked a question, and I just want to acknowledge that I saw your question and I'm going to save it for later. Okay, it's a great question though. All right, so now we have a question of, can someone steal your research? This is something that people ask a lot, right? Can you steal research? Well, the question is, research is an action, right? So no, somebody can't steal the act of you walking. They can't steal the act of you singing. Can they try to publish your production of a song? Well, that's something different, but they can't steal you doing something. And so no, somebody can't steal your research. And that may be really shocking. But the fruits of your research becomes a little bit different. We have to recognize we don't own the names, dates, and places and events of what happened, even if we're the one that found it. So again, think of it this way. You're walking a dog. What do you own? Well, you can own the dog and the leash for the dog, and you can own what you're wearing or what you're carrying, but you don't own walking. You can't. So you don't own your research, which is an action. You can't own facts, even if they're in your own database. Unless you transform your research from a collection of facts into something that requires a creative process, you have nothing someone can steal. Now, I want to get your honest reaction to what I just said. Having conversations with other genealogists, some people are like, yeah, that makes sense. And others like, no. So right now, let's take a few moments and tell me, how does that make you feel? The fact that, wait, somebody can't steal my research, the research part. Is that clarifying? Is that horrifying? Let me know your reaction. Patricia had said the distinction is helpful: facts versus stories and analysis of what can and cannot be copywritten. The distinction, what you cite and something that you could be copyrighted, a quote from a book. Yeah. Exactly. That's the clarification. So a quote from a book, but remember that quote can't just be facts, right? It can't just be locations. It has to be something in which a creative process was involved. So, and D. Mullen, you got it. Putting facts together doesn't require creativity, and that's why it can't be copywritten. Okay. One more chance. I saw something else here. Um, no, I didn't. All right. So go ahead and keep taking some time to share with me your feelings of this distinction of not being able to own your facts. Okay. All right. Okay. So now I'm going to put this. I like this. Research as a noun is actually your analysis of fact that you gathered, but research as a verb is quite different. Thank you. That is a great distinction. Your research, right? When you start creating analysis and when you start creating stories and when you start creating notes and stuff, that's yours. But putting a fact into a family tree, that's not yours when you're doing the research. And June says, I prefer facts to be shared to help others. Absolutely. Okay, so go right here. Now, if you still feel like people are stealing your research and not compensating you for your time, expand and expended money, then you don't and you don't share your family history online, well, you're going against kind of what June just said. I prefer to share the facts to help others because in the end, it helps me, right? The more I share, the more people come back and they have new ideas, new records, new sources, new memories, and so forth that I haven't tapped into. And that's the power of that collaborative nature. So I know it's hard to hear, but I paid for it. You're right. Now, you still don't own the copyright for what you paid for. And we'll talk about that in a little bit later. But this is something we're contributing to our family as a gift of love. And so we kind of have to get past that. Okay, so there's a comment coming in. I'll wait for that to come in. So, what exactly is copyrightable and what do family history writers need to know about such context? Copyright protects the expression of an idea or a fact. So, biographical sketches, county histories, genealogy research, scholarly journal articles, newspaper articles, maps, photographs, church records, paintings, sketches. Notice how it's either text, images, or graphics. But the text, remember, it's a sketch or a history or a report or an article. And all of that requires creative input. And so, yes, Tabitha, facts found are fair game, but your analysis of the facts are not. And yes, you got it right, right? So I hope this slide that I just shared about what the copyright protecting an idea or the presentation of a fact. And let me clarify, not just the idea, the expression of an idea. And that's where we kind of get in trouble. So let's go ahead and give you some examples to try to help clarify this some more. So, is this copyrightable? Robert Victor Zemtine, he died in 1967, and I visited Green Line Cemetery and found that information in 1994. So, I'm kind of have a partial citation. I saw this information when I visited. Is that copyrightable? Well, if you said no, you would be correct. It's just facts on a stone. All right. So information from a gravestone visited in person cannot be copyrighted. You can use it freely. You don't need to ask for permission, But yes, cite the personal visit to the gravestone with a better genealogical reference than I have on the screen. That's not a citation. It's just telling you the experience for teaching purposes. All right, what about this? This is a photo taken of that gravestone. What is copyrightable? Now, assuming the person who took the photo is still alive, permission is required to use the photograph, not the facts, in your published work. If the photographer is deceased, typically the photograph is protected for 70 years following their death date, and you should request permission from their heirs at the estate. Always cite the source. And then when you include it in your book, then you want to tell readers, use with permission of, and then state who gave you the permission. Make sure you actually have the permission. Just don't, throw it in there without asking for permission. But that's the way you let others know that, yes, this is protected. Here's the person who owns the copyright to the photograph, and they've granted me permission. Okay. All right. Now, before we continue, let me explain another term that you may encounter, and that is public domain. Public domain is the state of belonging or being available to the public as a whole, and therefore not subject to copyright. And as genealogists, we really like to find things in the public domain. For family history writers, this helps us to use text, images, or graphics freely in our genealogy projects without any fear that we can get into legal trouble. But we always have to cite our sources. Some text, images, or graphics are in the public domain because of the copyright law. So let's go over some regulations. And keep your questions coming in. Sometimes I will pause and work them in, and sometimes I'll just save them for later. But feel free, if you're watching this live stream and you have a answer for somebody in the community, you can always jump in. We're a community of learners. Now, copyright has a term limit. Every year, that term limit expires on January 1st, and it accounts for 96 years prior to the current date until we get to 1978 and things change a bit. Now, in the handout, I have a link to this information so that if it's a little fuzzy, you'll be able to look at it. So thus, in 2023, anything published before 1927 is in the public domain. This includes books, films, magazines, and newspapers, all things that we as genealogists reference. And remember, this is U.S. copyright law. I can't speak to other countries. If an unpublished work was created by an author who died before 1952, those items are also in the public domain. So what does that mean? Well, you don't need permission to take this article from the Journal and Tribune in Knoxville, Tennessee from 1922. You don't need permission from that newspaper to include that clipping in your genealogy work. But you will need to cite the source to be considered a qualified or experienced genealogist. So what about this article? It's published in 1985. What changes then? Newspapers published after 1977 are copyrighted and not in the public domain or copywritten. You need to obtain permission to use. You have to cite the source, and you should note that permission was granted for this article. Now, that can be kind of tricky because the owners of these newspapers aren't easy to find, especially those that have been sold multiple times. But if you want to actually show the clipping rather than cite the source, you're going to need some permission to do that. But wait a minute. What if I want to quote the text? Can I do that? Well, that is when we're coming into the area of fair use. Sometimes you can utilize copywritten material in your genealogy creations if what you make and what you use falls under fair use. But I have to just stress, this is a defense, not a guideline. So what does that really mean? Well, if you were taken to court over using something that is copywritten, but you feel that what you're sharing falls under fair use, then fair use comes into play, because then you have to defend yourself and you have to articulate how does it fall in. And a judge in that case might have to make that decision for you that yes, it falls into fair use, or no, it does not. Now, some of you are like, okay, I'm not going to use anything that is copywritten because I'm too afraid to be sued. Well, you have to understand that for many purposes that we're going to go over fair use, you can actually use it. But this is not legal counsel. I'm not telling you you're going to always get away with something. So you have to assess the risk of what you want to include and the likelihood of being taken to court, and then understand whether you can use it or not. But your defense would be fair use, but it doesn't always mean it is going to be a successful claim. Okay, so let's talk about fair use, because again, this does allow us to use some copywritten material in our projects. It allows someone to use that content for the purpose other than the original person created it, which usually falls into the category of criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Okay, I really want you to pay attention to that research part, because let's think about scientists. Scientists will often build their research based on previously published research papers and research context. So, are they stealing somebody else's work when they redo an experiment? No, they will reference the sources that gave them the background material in order to conduct an analysis, and they rerun the process and come up with results. And therefore, if it aligns, what are you doing? You're giving more credibility to the previous research. If it doesn't, well, now you've got to explain why the other one doesn't matter. So now you've got criticism, you're teaching it's scholarly in purpose, and it is your research. And so, yes, you can use other pieces of genealogical data that has copyright protection. And as long as you are following the fair use guidelines, you will typically be fine in what you're doing. Okay. And Betsy, I'll come back to your question at the end. Okay. We're going to focus on writing since it's a writing channel, but I like your question. We'll save that to the end. Okay. Now, with the increase use of YouTube and other social media websites where we share context, fair use is being studied heavily. And we can understand various ways we can use copywritten material in our production. So what's really interesting, having been a YouTuber and trying to pay attention, what can I use, what can't I use, so on and so forth, I'm seeing over the last 6 years that I've had my primary channel, this argument of fair use. And sometimes somebody will get a copyright claim and they will dispute it. And then it says, hey, it does fall under fair use. And this body of knowledge of decision making of what is fair use and what isn't is really strengthening creators in order to figure out where that line is. But you're not a YouTube creator, and I totally get it. But if you ever are wondering, how can I learn more about what I can use? Actually do some studies or searches on YouTube of fair use and see what some of the counsel has been regarding strikes and getting them removed. And it can actually give you some other insight into another industry that deals with copyright, and it can help you in writing your stories. So, fair use doctrine has 4 elements. Courts typically focus on whether the use of copy-protected material is transformative. And that's why we talked about this distinction earlier in this webinar. And many of you got it. It's like, okay, so my facts I can't protect, but my analysis I can. Yes, because you're transforming those facts into something else. So as genealogy writers, we need to add new expressions or meaning to the original material rather than just merely copying it from, I'm going to come back to that statement in a second, merely copying it from the original. We have to add new stories, new discoveries, new persons, new meanings, new questions, new analysis. When you're doing the genealogy proof standard and it says, well-written conclusions, that is transformative. And that is something that is, when you take somebody else's work and you add an analysis and conclusions, your stuff is now copywritten and you can use the previous copywritten information within your project because you have to critique it. You have to analyze it and then come up with your conclusion. But if the publication was printed before 1927, we can utilize the content without altering it very much. And if a published genealogy is mostly just facts, you can use everything in that project, even if it's published after 1927, because it's just facts. Does that help you understand copyright? I hope it does. So if the person who created a published family history wrote stories, you can use it in fair use if you transform their stories. There's some other elements. We're just talking about the first principle. But if you do transform things, you are falling under fair use, but always remember to cite your sources. So I have to say that again and again. While copyright judgments may be hesitant to allow someone to profit off of, where is it? Right here. The profit under what you create, it is not always an automatic. If you profit off of this commercialized stuff, then it's not fair use and you have to pay royalties. So there is some misunderstanding that, can I sell my book? Well, are you profiting onto somebody else's stuff? Well, perhaps I'm trying to get compensated for the work I did and I did transform it. Many fair use judges in cases don't always default, well, you profited on it and so you can't use it. But it just all kind of depends, and there's some other principles to go over. Okay. If you're utilizing content from primarily factual works, you're more likely using it in a fair use way than fiction. So fair use lawsuits tend to deal with somebody who created a story, let's say Divergent or The Hunger Games, or those are more recent. Those are protected by copyright. But if you're going to quote something from The Scarlet Pimpernel, it might be out of copyright. And so then you don't really have to worry about it as much. But if you're trying to quote something from The Hunger Games and put it into your story, then it can become problematic. But as genealogists, we're dealing with facts. And that helps to alleviate some of the stress of what we can use in our own productions. Okay, another principle. And this is one that creates a lot of confusion because there are no hard and fast rules here. Borrowing small bits of material from an original work is more likely to be considered fair use than borrowing large portions. But if what's borrowed is considered the heart of the work, sometimes even a small sampling may weigh against the fair use. So what does that mean? There's no hard and fast rules. It's kind of muddy. There are a lot of articles. There's a lot of recommendations that say, oh, you can cite 25% or no more than 35%. And the truth of the matter is that is inaccurate. Now, in the publishing industry, there are some standards that publishers put out. Now, why would they do that? Well, they're publishing lots of books and trying to make money. And it's easier to go out after a publishing company to get damages than it is from just an individual citing a song like Bon Jovi's Living on a Prayer, right? And so publishers will have strict rules to reduce the legal liabilities that they could face if somebody overly cites something, to protect the publisher, not necessarily to make a statement on what is valid and fair use. But one thing to keep in mind is smaller portions of an original work is often better. A lot of times you don't really need very much. So if I'm looking at a county history of Franklin County, Ohio, there's probably just a few paragraphs that I really care about. And under fair use, if it is still protected by copyright, I can quote that portion and put it into my book. And I'm using it under fair use and I'm not falling into copyright violations. Okay, this is a great comment, I think worth pointing out right about now. Since 1989, the U.S. no longer requires the copyright symbol to appear on a work that is copywritten. Since 1989, all works are copywritten immediately upon creation. Absolutely. So when you write your book, you don't need to apply for the copyright protection from the federal government. It's just assumed when you create it, it's copywritten. The same is true of your Uncle Earl, who also wrote a family history. As soon as he created it, is copywritten. When something is copywritten, you need to ensure that you are citing that source. Absolutely. And sometimes you need to reach out to Uncle Earl and say, hey, you had this really great paragraph. Can I use it in my book? I'm going to expand on it. It's not going to be the whole body of the work. I just really like the way you phrased this. And getting permission is always a way to ensure that you're following copyright. But sometimes you don't like Uncle Earl, or Uncle Earl is like, no way, no heck. Well, what do you do then? In that case, if it falls under fair use and you're using portions of it and it's not the whole work, now you've met one requirement of fair use. If you're then adding commentary and transforming his paragraph, like after you're adding some analysis or expanding upon it and so forth, then you've got two parts of fair use that you've met. So that's why we're going over fair use, just because the more that you can hit of the fair use principles, the more likely you're protected in using some other text, images, and graphics from other sources. I did talk about the publishing houses. I'm going to go ahead and advance to the next slide because I don't want you to keep you forever. Now, another doctrine of fair use is the impact it has on the market or value of the original work. So the question that's being asked is, does it harm the copyright owner's profit margin from the original work? So let that sink in for a moment. Does it harm their profitability? Now, let's be honest. Very few genealogists who publish their work make money off of their books. Nobody really. I'm not making money off of Joseph Geisler from Baden to Ohio. And so if it's not going to necessarily affect my bottom line, then it can fall under fair use. But be careful. Remember, this is a defense. It's not a guarantee that you can use something like that. So just something to keep in mind. All right. But I need to share my screen again. So let's talk about that Jon Bon Jovi that I said earlier. Let's say you want to use song lyrics written or performed by Bon Jovi in a personal memoir or family history. Can you? It's possible. And why? Because you could actually be helping to sell more Bon Jovi content if someone is unfamiliar with the song It's My Life or Living on a Prayer. Your inclusion of this band and their lyrics and the sampling their song can motivate the reader to just learn more about Bon Jovi and possibly purchase their content. So I said that multiple times, but you get the idea. So if I sample Living on a Prayer, or I sample It's My Life to kind of set the stage, because I've talked about this in other presentation, like what are the sounds, what's going on, I sampled the White Christmas, I'll be home, not White Christmas, I'll be home for Christmas, if only in my dream, in my story about my grandpa Lou, because guess what, he was on his way home from serving in World War II. That song was super popular. I don't know if they actually liked it, but he did say, hey, you know, I'm wondering what Louise thought when she heard that song, as her own husband is on his way home and probably won't make it for Christmas. So now I've added historical context. Well, if somebody has never actually heard that song, they're going to go look up the song, I'll Be Home for Christmas. And the same thing goes true for when I write my memoirs about being a teenager in the 80s and 90s, being an uber fan of Bon Jovi. Some of their songs helped me through some of the darkest times of my life. If I want to quote some of their song lyrics, is it going to negatively affect him? No, it's actually going to positively affect him. And so that idea of, is it going to harm someone financially or possibly benefit them? That's another way that things can fall into copy or fair use doctrine, where you can use copywritten material. I like all the discussion you guys going on. So, oh, and just another thought here about the Bon Jovi is, how do you think Bon Jovi is having a resurgence of popularity if it's not for people in my generation saying how great the music is, and then samplings of his songs are appearing in different movies? Now, my family history book, I doubt he's going to come and try to get royalties from me because it's got like the smallest circulation ever, right? But if his songs are sampled in various movies, I think it was also sampled in Sabrina, the Teenage Witch, and I'm sure he's going to go after royalties. Why? Because there's a larger audience and they're going to go after the royalty there, because his song being in there, sure, people might go, wait, what's that music? But they also want to kind of get some compensation. Just something to keep in mind there. So once again, I need to stress that fair use is not a clear set of rules. The more you can hit some of these fair use, the more confident you can feel you can add these things to your genealogy work and feel like you're not violating copyright. You're just giving credit and acknowledgement to somebody who produced something, and then you're reusing it. As soon as whatever you're using goes into the public domain, you're pretty good to go. If you choose to use text, images, or graphics in your genealogy work, you might have to appeal to a court if someone sues you for copyright infringement. You would defend your use of that content based on fair use. You'll have to weigh for yourself. I am not giving you counsel of saying, yes, that absolutely falls into fair use. That doesn't. I am just giving you recommendation and advice so you can assess the risk of a potential lawsuit for what you create, and then asking you to use that to be your guide. If you get permission, the lawsuits are less likely. But obtaining permission sometimes is rather difficult. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, so there are some things. Fair use is constantly being defined by the courts, case by case. Absolutely. That's why I say fair use is a defense. It's not unlike the copyright law, where it says anything before this date based on these criteria is now in the public domain. That is like a hard and fast rule. Fair use is kind of fungible, and you have to kind of decide, all right, can I use it or not? Okay, so I thought there was, my cousin sent me questions about family. I sent him creative written work. He used all of it without citing me. How it's his copywritten work? It's a very good question. Unfortunately, I'm not entirely sure that your responses to somebody's question would fall under copyright for sure. right? That's kind of a fuzzy area because you're having conversation. Because here's a for instance. When I worked as a journalist, I would ask people stuff and then I would write a report based on their responses. So if they wrote their responses, if they spoke their responses, it wasn't considered copywritten. I was able to put that into a newspaper article. Now, if I took video of them or audio of them, I had to get a person release. So in the modeling industry, it's called a model release to use somebody's likeness, but I don't know that's actually called a model release, but it is a release that you had this interview with me and now you allow me to put it into a news broadcast. So a lot of news stations will have these release forms in order to have somebody's video in there. But when somebody's writing responses, I don't necessarily know that that falls under copywritten material because you were just responding to questions. Unless, of course, you had a book, you shared it to them, it was unpublished work. Well, then that's a completely different story. So we can have that discussion. It's definitely something for all of us to investigate. Like, what is her responses, and then turn it into a book. Was your responses copywritten? I just don't think so, but I could be wrong, and I would love to have that discussion with all of you. But you did say this. I'm not going to sue my cousin, but it's a hard lesson learned, to be sure. Let's see. Oh, so my references to the music, you said that it brings back memories. Bonnie Raitt should promote it if it's used in my memoir. Okay. Let's go to the next part that I want to talk about. Let's talk about the how much can I use. Under the fair use doctrine, it is permissible to use limited portions of a work, including quotes, for such purposes as commentary, criticism, news reporting, and scholarly reports. There's no legal rules permitting the use of a specific number of words or a percentage of how much of the work you can use. So remember earlier I said publishers will often print out a list of guidelines of what you can use and what you can't. There is this diagram. It's from janefriedman.com, and that should be linked in your handout. If it's not, send me an email. I'll update it for everybody. But it's this flow chart of decision making. Is any of the following true? It's in the public domain, the material URL, or is it a URL, title, author, plain fact, or short phrase? If it is yes, do these things. The material is online from a full-length work and does not encapsulate the heart of the work. If it is, then yes. And it just goes through all of these yes-no decisions to try to help you know, do I need to go get permission or not? So it is a good reference guideline to help you make some decisions. But let's go through some examples. On the 12th of March, 1912, Richard Kethern started his journey from Cornwall with two companions, his cousin John Harry and Thomas Eustace. As we said before, not copyright protected. Two weeks before his 20th birthday, he likely visited his father's and older sister's grave before bidding farewell to his mother and 6 other siblings aged 30 to 10. Now, there are some facts here, but there are so many sources in order to create that sentence that is now creative processing of that information. And in that case, that sentence is now copyright protected. Now, in fair use, if somebody wanted to cite that and incorporate it into their story, so long as they don't copy my entire book and that's not the only thing they took out, then they now are in fair use. The family had recently moved from the village of St. Keverne, England, on the southeastern coast of Cornwall. They now reside in Helston, an inland town 11 miles northwest of St. Keverne. Not copyright protected. All facts, just facts. It's a location, the distance between two towns, all of that is just facts. It's not copyright protected. Another example, his home village, deep in Cornish history, was unusual. The village was built around a central square, uncommon for a Cornish town. Now, you may say uncommon requires a judgment. It could be considered copyright protected, but it's not. It's just facts. But Richard's ancestry resided in England for almost 400 years, all of it in a small corner of Cornwall known as the Lizard Peninsula. During that time, no ancestor traveled more than 20 miles from their birthplace. Now, the part that says Cornwall, known as the Lizard Peninsula, that's not copywritten, but everything else around there is mine and my husband's creation. And so if somebody wanted to have that, the phrase is copyright protected. But we still have to understand if somebody quoted it, it could be considered fair use. Let me know if you're finding these examples valuable to see, okay, that's protected, that's not protected, but even though that's protected, it could be used as long as I do a number of those practices spoken of in fair use. So give me some feedback while you're watching this presentation. I really want to ensure that I'm giving you value. And if I'm not, I want to come back and clarify. Another example, Richard was born in a 2-week period just before his 20th birthday. He crossed an ocean and traversed a continent, traveling farther and faster than centuries of ancestors. That entire sentence is an analysis. It's a creative statement by my husband and I. And so that's copyright protected, and somebody would need permission in order to use that, or they need to fall into fair use if they're not going to seek permission. So quotes are the saving grace. Yes and no. You need to put the quotes. You also need to add the citation. But if there's ever any doubt whether you can use something or not, just ask. If the author is alive, go say, hey, I have this really great quote from you and I want to incorporate it in my book. If you want to see how I'm using it to make sure that you agree that I can, I would love your permission, and could you give it to me in writing? That would be the third tier to ensure that you are having a saving grace. But if the person is deceased and the heirs are hard to talk to or track down, well, then you have to see if it falls into fair use and so forth. So I wouldn't say quotes are your saving grace. There's more steps to it, but great question. And you said that examples help, so glad to hear it. Here's another example. Over the next 50 years, he traveled all through North America by automobile, bus, train, airplane, and boat. But in 1958, he made a journey back to his home in the Lizard Peninsula and was welcomed with open arms by family he had not seen in 46 years. Again, perfect example of copyright material. This isn't facts. It is factual, but it's not facts because somebody had to study this life in order to create this statement. I hope that makes sense. This isn't just a name, date, and place. This is an analysis of what happened in this person's life, and then you pull this together in a meaningful way. So, Andy owns the right. Okay, so I did want to insert picture of book. I wanted to grab a book real quick instead of insert picture. Oh. Let's go ahead and go here. Now, in this book, there are many chapters. I'm not going to zoom in because some of these people are living. Many of these chapters are written by the descendants of Burton and Jeanette Lee. Okay. Now, within this book, who owns the copyright for the story my husband wrote? Think about that for a moment. You saw the slide a moment ago. I kind of gave it away. But within this book, the compiler owns the copyright to the part that they wrote. But Andy owns the copyright to his story that he wrote, and he granted permission for the compiler to use it. So if Andy wants to then take his story out of here and put it into a new book or a new format, he can do that because he owns the copyright to his own story. So if you submit something to someone and it's your story and your submission, even though you allowed them to use it in their work, then you own the copyright to that story. Now, could it be both? Well, the question is, what documentation did the compiler get in order to use these stories in any other format? So when Andy submitted his story, it wasn't formal because it's family, right? But what he is granting permission for the compiler to put it in this book. He did not grant permission for that compiler to then take Andy's story and put it in another format. So no, they both don't own the copyright, right? The creator has the copyright to this book, but the individual stories within reside still with the person who wrote that story. Now, okay, this is something to point out. Unless the person wants to publish your private papers after this time of copyright has expired, putting your papers in the public domain as far as using them is concerned. You do make some valid points, but remember, it's not after the death of the compiler, but the death of you. If somebody takes your papers and puts it into the public domain, it's based on your life. Now, the other thing I forgot to mention is if Andy actually signed a release that said you can use my story however you want into perpetuity, that's when the compiler can then have the rights to do whatever she wants with that story. And people would have to ask permission from the compiler. But if somebody wants to take Andy's story out of that book and create a new production, they have to talk to Andy. They don't have to talk to the compiler, even though it's in the compiler's book. Does that help clarify? Because I know there are so many examples in published family histories of works people submit, particularly to a county history, that you can still use the story if you ask permission from the person who wrote the story to then use it in another thing. You don't necessarily have to go to the compiler of the county history. Yeah, Stacy, you kind of have it. It's like different people writing different songs on one album. Playing a song goes to the people who wrote the song, not just who is on the album. That is correct. You're in the right. Okay, so let's go to this one. Now, the biggest problem people have is copyright in images. We want to decorate our books. We want to enhance them because it just makes it more enjoyable. And this is where a lot of people get into trouble. And I'm going to strive to wrap this up pretty quickly, but make sure I have lots of time for stories. Questions, sorry, not stories. I saw the word story and then I went and did question. All right, so let's talk about images. If an image is in the public domain or it has a limited license and your book falls within the criteria of that limited license, then you can use that book and that image in your project. Of course, we want to cite our sources because that's what good genealogists do. But let's talk about the German Revolution of 1848. I found this image. Can I use this image? I don't think it's clickable. Yeah, I don't think, oh, it is clickable. Now, when you click to find out information about reusing it, it says this work is in the public domain in the country of origin and other countries and areas where the copyright term is author's life plus 70 years or fewer. You must include a U.S. public domain tag to indicate why this work is in the public domain. So not only are you citing that source, because that's what good genealogists do, but we're also adding a notification, sort of like that statement that says, used with permission of, and then you say who that gave you the permission to use it. When you do find something in the public domain, it behooves you either as a caption to the image or within the source citation to then explain it is in the public domain because. And what's really great about Wikipedia is they will give you If you click on use this file on the web, use this file in a wiki, they will give you the citation you just need to add in the caption or in addition to the genealogy source citation we create, and now you're covered. So that's one of the things I'm going to recommend you do with public domain images. Other sources of public domain images: anything that is created or generated by the US government is considered in the public domain, regardless of when it was created. So here you can go to the Library of Commerce. There's actually a number of sources on the handout. Remember, the link is in the description if you are not on our writing email list. If you are on the writing email list, don't go through that process again, because I just sent you an email this morning with the link, direct link to the handout. But if it's a US government source, you can use that photo. But again, we want to cite our sources. So I think I don't have to say that anymore, but if I keep doing it, I'm just trying to emphasize, because repetition is the first law of learning. We need to cite our sources. It's just important. So the U.S. Library of Congress is a great source of royalty-free, or public domain rather, images. However, I have an asterisk on this. And the reason why there's an asterisk is because not everything at the Library of Congress is in the public domain. So you need to make sure that when you find an image or you find something that you want to quote and so forth, go and make sure you look at the licensing agreement for that item or artifact. And that will tell you if it's in the public domain or not. When in doubt, reach out to the librarian or the curator. Say, hey, this is really great. I would like to use it, but I can't find the licensing. Is this public domain? Is it a limited license? Could you explain? It's better to ask and get clarification than to use something and mess up greatly. So if it's created by the government, you can use it. So the Navy, the Marines, the United States Agricultural Commission, or any of those types of entities, if they're creating it, you can use it. But it doesn't mean just because it's in the Library of Congress, it doesn't have copyright. So make sure you check that out. Now, there are a number of archives, particularly the Digital Public Library of America, the Portal of Texas. I'm sure there's others. Those are the two that popped into my mind right now. They do have a number of items that are in the public domain that you can utilize to enhance your work, even if it doesn't directly have your ancestors. So this is a road scene in California, published as the Wide West office in San Francisco. Well, if you have ancestors from that time period, you may want to use this image. Now, this image happens to be in the public domain, but there are other images on the Digital Public Library of America that are not. Again, look for what the licensing agreement says under that image to determine if you can use it or not, without seeking permission and violating copyright. But if you do find something and you can incorporate it using fair use, then follow the practices of fair use going forward. Okay, so Flickr Commons. Flickr Commons is a really great place to find public domain or images you can use in your story project without citing. I need to stop and say this better. So Flickr Commons is a great way to get public domain images or limited license images from around the world. There will be archives from the Netherlands or Ireland or any sort of affiliated archive. A lot of them are putting their archives on flickr.com, which is a great way to go one-stop shopping kind of situation. But again, you want to look for the licensing just as if you were using Wikipedia. What is the licensing? What does it tell me to do? If it is protected by copyright, how do I get permission? Or can I follow fair use in order to use that? That's what it always comes back to. So now I want to go through the process of how I wrote my memoir. and which is on the back shelf for metal rhinestones, and the different checks that I went through to ensure that I could use pictures in my project. The first step, am I allowed to publish photos that my mother took? Well, that's an easy conversation, right? First, I cited who took the photo, and then I gave it a little quote. I always like seeing captions because it gives details such as my favorite dress or this dress from Grandma Geisler. So that part is just a little added something into the caption field. But notice I'm saying photo by Penny Geisler, and I give you copyright, or actually that's a circa, so about 1986. It's not a copyright. I don't need to put a copyright on that. But since my mom is deceased and I inherited all of her photos, then I can use all the photos that she took because I'm the heir, right? If she was alive, I would say, Mom, can I put this in my memoir? And she would say, yeah, I have no problem with that. So that's an easy conversation to have. Again, I'm in a public place in this one, and you might think, oh, well, you have to be careful of public places. Well, no, my mom took those pictures, and I can allow myself to publish those since I have inherited her books. So now let's talk about glamour shots. So if you're watching this live or if you're watching the replay, how many of you had a glamour shot photo? I want to know that I'm not the only one. So let me know if you had it. Now with glamour shots was rather a easy copyright release to track down. These pictures are protected by copyright. I was going to put this book, it's available on Amazon. So I just wanted to cover my basis and move forward. So I consulted their corporate headquarters. Now they were confused why I wanted a copyright release form. That's what it's called, copyright release. Okay. So when you want to use pictures that somebody else took or owns the copyright to, you have to get a copyright release in order to use it. So they were really confused. Why are you trying to get a copyright release for a photo from the 1990s? They only cared about photos that they can sell for reprints within the past 5 years. After that, they just really don't care. Nevertheless, they're familiar with copyright release forms. And so they had a template. They said, tell me the dates. What are you going to use it for? And from then on, I needed to say photo by glamour shots. Now, ideally, you could put a copyright. I wouldn't even say ideally. You could put the copyright symbol and then say used with permission. I made a mistake, but the reason why I include this in here of making it mistake, I didn't say use with permission. I have the permission in my files, in my permanent files, so that if there is a problem, I say, you know what, I attributed it incorrectly, but here's my permission. Okay. So ideally you would put use with permission from glamour shots, copyright glamour shots, and so forth. But if you do make a mistake, just make sure you have the permission. Okay. So we had June, glamour shots in 1980s. A cousin did, and in the 1980s. Good job. All right. I'm in good company. Okay, let's go to this next one. Now, this one was by David Smith of Select Studios. I used their contact form on their website, monitoring, mentioning who I worked for and when. And I did this after I contacted Glamour Shot, so I was kind of certain they'd be like, we don't really care. But if they did, I wanted to get their permission. I explained what I wanted to use the photos for in a memoir. The officer manager said that David no longer works there. Oh no, how am I going to get the copyright? But they said, you know, he worked for Select Studios at the time those photos were taken. So we do have the right to approve or disapprove requests. Based on what you're telling us, we have no problem. They have a template and sent it my way. It wasn't really difficult to obtain that. They're in the modeling industry. That's great. So we have two functioning businesses. They were easy to find online. But what happens when you can't? What happens if you can't find the name of the businesses? So this is one by Stephen Leonard. It was a little bit more difficult to track him down because he's starting to be retired, but thankfully, you know, using the Wayback Machine and some other sources, I was able to find his website. And I tracked down the living person and I reached out to him and he said, I don't want to fill out a model release form, but use this email as my permission. I don't mind. He's like, I'm going to die anyway. I don't care. So I'm like, all right, no problem. So then I started running into two other problems. This photographer, Terry Botch, was impossible to find because he's no longer working. And I was curious if he had passed away or not. Now, I have a brother who works in finding living people because he's a debt collector. Don't hate me because of the job my brother does, but it does come in handy when I need to track down living individual. So when he found Terry and said, hey, my sister wants to use pictures you took in the 90s. He's like, I don't remember your sister, but I don't care. And so my brother was able to get the permission in writing, and I was able to put this in my book. And the same holds true for George Wang. He was out of business. He was no longer taking pictures because he's taken so many pictures of so many pageant girls and aspiring winners. He couldn't remember me from Adam, right? Just doesn't remember, but had no problem doing the copyright release form. So again, get permission. But now I run into a big problem. There are two pictures, and I'll show you them very briefly. These two pictures were taken by a very famous pageant photographer named David Bartley. So when I went and started looking for David Bartley, I found that he had passed away. So I thought, all right, well, maybe I can figure this out. Well, it turns out he had divorced his wife, the woman who did my hair and makeup. He took the photo. So they were in business together. Would she have the rights to the business? Because I found her contact information. Well, sadly for me, and probably sadly for them, they divorced. And she gave all intellectual property rights of the business to David. So I can't talk to her. And I found all this, in newspapers. You can find a lot about living people or recently deceased person. Now, when I attempted to reach out to the heirs of David Bartley, and it said, hey, your father took pictures of me. You're the heir. I'd like permission to use his pictures in my memoir. Could we have a conversation? Well, I was flagged as spam. And they told me I was a scammer. What are they doing? Their dad is deceased. Why am I after them? No, they're not going to give me permission because they don't understand why they need to give me permission. And so now I'm thinking, well, I would really like to use these pictures. I sought out permission. What am I going to do? Well, it's going to be 2082 before I can use these pictures because they're finally in the public domain. 70 years plus the death, 70 years to the death of Mr. Bartley. Do I want to wait that long to publish my own memoir with these pictures that are pretty instrumental in the story of my transformation from a teen to a miss? That's when I have to decide, fair use, ? And I have opted to go ahead and follow fair use because I tried to track down the permission. The person thinks I'm the scammer. What else am I supposed to do? I did my due diligence. So the next thing I'm going to say is if you run into that problem, document your attempts to get permission and the responses. Now, if they say no, they say no. But this person said no because they don't understand why I'm asking, which is an entirely different discussion. And so if I ever run into a problem, I can say, look, I reached out to you and I sent this email on this date and this is what you said. You thought I was a scammer. And all I'm trying to do is follow copyright law and get your permission. So, you know how we document all the sources and then the negative searches we have? This would be considered a negative source. I corresponded. They thought I was, being crazy. I'm going to go ahead and use this because I'm using it under fair use. And I did my due diligence in order to try to get that. So to eliminate all possible risks, the best approach is either ask for permission or only use copywritten material in your work. And that includes quotes, graphics, and images. But the only way your use of copyright is tested by a lawsuit that it may or may not happen. There's no general policy for copyright. Well, not general policy. There's no general policing of copyright. If you publish something, there's not some entity saying you can't use that necessarily, right? However, how you handle copyright depends on how risk adverse you are. If you decide not to seek permission because you plan to use the fair use argument, be prepared with the best possible case to defend your use of the copywritten material in the event that you are sued. So with that being said, I'm going to go through the questions you all have and comments. If you have some, I have a little bit more time. If you're enjoying this, make sure you click the like button, share it with others. That's a great way to help me know that you really like these webinars and you want them to continue. Again, March 16th, I believe, is a Thursday. And at the same time, we're going to be talking about writing ethically, the ethical concerns that come up in writing. So I went ahead and covered that one. Although facts aren't copywritten, what about taking all of the work generated from a family history and presenting it as your own research? Barbara, I hope I already answered that question, but let me give you a couple more specifics. Remember, you can't actually take the research somebody else created and build upon it. You have to transform it in order for you to be in the clear. So think of being a scientific researcher. They get a paper and it explains the methodology of a science experiment, and you want to replicate that. Replicating their experiment is not stealing their work, because you're going to redo it just based on something they came up with to either validate it or expand it or criticize it. So yes, you can actually use a lot of research somebody else has, but you have to transform it. And then, because we want to be ethical, make sure you cite that. Give credit to the person who initially started the work for you. And in that case, I think you're in the clear. Okay. Okay, I'm not really sure about that comment. Okay, when someone posts a photo on Ancestry and have no idea who owns the photo, the photographer, etc., how do you credit it? Now, that actually ties into a question somebody else said, and I was going to address it now. They had said, when they heard that I was going to do this presentation, they said, I had the original photo in my possessions and I put a copy of the image on Ancestry. Somebody downloaded it, put it online, and then put a copyright symbol on it. Is that good? Okay, so let's address both. For that previous question, if the photo's in the public domain, just slapping a copyright symbol on it doesn't make it copywritten, right? I don't think that's wise. I don't think that's playing nice in the genealogy community, because then you're starting to scare people. And also you're taking away the credit from, and this leads to your point right here, you're taking away the credit of who owns that original picture, because who owns the original picture is typically somebody invested in the research of that person. So knowing, hey, they have pictures, they might have other things, or they may have other knowledge, they might have other stories. So I want to contact that person. So how do you credit a picture where you didn't do that, right? You didn't put a copyright symbol on it. You just found it. Well, do what any genealogist says. See it, one, cite what you find when you see it, right? That's always a good standard. And then maybe take that picture and pop it into a Google reverse image search where you upload a picture and it'll look for other copies of that picture. And I have a video on the main channel, Family History Fanatics. Google reverse image search. It's the keywords of that title. And then see if you can find other people that have that. Then also maybe go over to Family Search. And the reason why I like Family Search versus Ancestry is Family Search tends, I found a profile that breaks this rule and I'm so mad, but they tend to only have one copy of that image. And then it cites who it's from, and you can contact that person and say, who do you have the original picture in your possession? And I'm trying to accurately cite it and so forth. So just take that picture, go an extra step or two to try to see if you can figure out who has it. And I hope that answers your question. So how do you credit it? You start by citing where you first sign it, then try to do some due diligence to see if it is anywhere else, or reach out to the person who uploaded the photo and said, hey, do you have the possession of this? I'm really trying to get to the person who owns it. I hope that helps. All right. Let's see. All right. More questions. Okay. All right, this is a great question. Who owns the photos on Find a Grave? It is the website or the person who contributed the photo. In this case, I don't know, because I know there have been a lot of discussions about when you upload a photo to Find a Grave, Ancestry, Family Search, whatever, and there's all that legalese. Judy Russell will read the legalese, and I know she's had some problems with people uploading to some of these sites because the license that you were granting to Find a Grave, Ancestry, and so forth, she's not comfortable with it because she feels like you're giving an unlimited license to it. So what I'm going to say is the person who took the photo is the owner of the copyright of that photo. And so if you want to get permission to use it, I would typically go to the person who posted it because it's most likely that they took the picture. Same with billion graves. But I would also recommend that you look at the licensing agreement because there might be some oversight that I'm not aware of. But go to the person who uploaded the photo. It's most likely theirs, and get their permission because maybe they're going to send you a better copy of than what they uploaded to Ancestry to include in your book. And then you're building great relationships and giving them credit and making friends in the industry. That's how I would answer that. It all depends on the term and service, but go after the person who posted it. Let's see. What if you have a physical copy of the newspaper in your repository and you quoted the newspaper, or rather pulled a quote out of the paper? Okay, so let's talk about text. You don't have to get permission to cite that source if it's outside of that window that we talked about earlier, right? Now, if it's after that date, traditionally, you would seek permission in order to quote that article, but we just talked about fair use. If what you're trying to do falls under fair use, you don't necessarily need to reach out and get permission. But if you're risk adverse for that newspaper to come after you and sue you, then I would seek permission. Does that make sense? Okay. I need to relearn how to add text to a photo and to add the citation. Well, I believe there is a video. It's either on Write Your Family History or it's over on the Family History Fanatics YouTube channel about using Google, and it's a funky way to add the text. So that's one way to use it. But if you're using a different program, just go and Google it, put the program, insert caption to photo, and you're going to find 1,000,001 tutorials. All right. We are discussing contents in a book. What about a public family tree? Can I copy information from someone's family tree to my family tree without worrying about copyright? Okay, Betsy, I believe some people already gave you some commentary, and I love to see that. Let's see if I agree or disagree. Okay. Based on what I shared in this presentation today, if you are copying names, dates, places, and other facts such as title or unit that they served in the military, all of these facts, you can absolutely copy it to your tree without any citation to that tree. I would grab the citations to back up what you found too. So go revalidate their work is what I'm saying. Go reprove the facts. Now, if they have analysis, if they have stories, if they're sharing memories, anything that's a creative work. In fact, somebody, I love this sweet person. They found that I created a page about my ancestor, William Lester Long. It's actually in the scrapbook I showed you guys earlier for my grandma, Louise. They found that I shared this online from my really old blog, A Patient Genealogist. They uploaded that scrapbook page to Family Search, and I was a little irritated because they didn't do any type of citation. Now, do I absolutely need credit? No, but I created it, right? So if anybody has questions about those photos, about those people, I want them to come to me and I want to share. So in that case, it would have been really, really great if they had said, I found this on a website. It seems to be defunct. I did my best to find out. Attribution is it's polite. It's, should I say ethical? I'm not really sure, but it's playing nice in the sandbox. But back to your question, can I copy information from someone's family tree to mine without copyright? If it's factual, yes. If it's creative works, if it's stories, all of those things, then I would get permission. I would get permission is what I would say. But then again, you're really just creating a backup of their research. So what do you do? If you're not producing a book and stuff, you're kind of out of that realm. The transfer of information between trees is kind of a fuzzy area. I know you're safe for facts when it's their commentary and analysis, it can be problematic. But the biggest problem is when you're writing blog posts, you're creating videos, you're creating podcasts, you're creating books based on their stuff. And if it's their analysis and stuff, then you kind of get into a negative area. So I'd be careful with that. But why not just reach out to other researchers and talk about sharing? And to me, getting their permission of say, hey, I really like that analysis. I'm going to put in mine. I'm going to quote you, and then I'm going to add to it. I think you're covering all those bases. So I hope that answers your questions. Okay. It's a good point. If you have a copy of a work that you own, you are not the copyright holder. You still have to get permission to use other than brief snippets based on fair use, right? So yes, a lot of us have things in our possession that somebody else has all copyright to. And so we would need to seek permission in order to incorporate that into our projects. But we also have that fair use if we're using portions of it or citing it or adding maybe a picture of something that somebody created and putting that into our projects. It's better to strive to get their permission or to follow fair use than to just totally grab it and pass it off on your own. Copyright is really trying to prevent people from passing something off as their own and benefiting from it. All right. Okay. Okay, Betsy has a question. Do these rules about fair use and copyright apply to things you write and keep privately, such as journals, family trees not published or public? If you are keeping things unpublished in your own home, who's going to come and sue you? That's a risk you're going to have to evaluate, right? The things that you write, if you write something and you are following fair use, you're getting permission for things like I did with my From Metal to Rhinestone book, I own the copyright to that book. So that's mine because I created it. I don't have to file for copyright and stuff. If somebody then wants to reference it, they would either need to fall under fair use or seek permission. I hope that answers your question. Okay. Can you use postcards and old postcards? I haven't seen anything about letters and correspondence being copyright protected. So I'm not sure. It's more things in which people tend to sell books, manuscripts, or not books, books, films, and the other list earlier that I shared in the presentation that everything is copyrighted. Now we've talked for so long, I'm spacing out all the particulars, images, those type of things. But postcards and old postcards, they tend to be correspondence, and I don't think that they're protected. I could be wrong. So just do a Google search, what's the copyright for letters? What's the copyright for postcards? Now the image on the postcard, I'm thinking really about the writing, but the image on the other side, use the same type of copyright rules that you would for a picture. When does that, if it's created before the date we said earlier this year, then earlier in the presentation, if it's before that, it's fine. If after that, you have to get permission, right? But the writing on the back, I don't think that's copywritten, copyrightable. Images are copyrighted if it's still in the time. That's what I was saying. Yep, that's what I was saying. So I think there might have been something about a photo. Get permission of people in a photo before posting it. That is typically the model release forms. It's very standard in journalism. It's very standard in any form of media and modeling. That's what's called a model release form. I would always get permission of people before posting their images. Okay, so Stacy had a follow-up. I'm sorry I didn't see this earlier. Journals I wrote in high school, if somebody would use part of that, do I retain a copyright even though I did not? Yes, you wrote it. It's published or unpublished. It's copyright comes into existence at the time of creation, not necessarily publishing. That is my understanding. Okay, very good question, Betsy. No. If somebody else gained permission to use a photo, that permission does not carry over to you. You need to seek out permission because remember, the conversation that person had in order to obtain the permission was, I'm going to use this picture in this format. Are you okay with that? So for me, I'm going to put it into my memoir. Now, if I make another memoir, I'm still in the clear because I'm making memoirs. But if I'm going to make a t-shirt or I'm going to make something else that I'm going to sell to the public instead of just, whatever, then we're running into problems. But I got permission for a specific use and it was granted to me because I sought it out. But if you came and tried to use the pictures that I gained permission for, you don't have that permission. You need to go through and do the permission request. Okay. That is a great question. I don't know. I don't know, and I guess the question is how well do you get along with your siblings? For me, my brother and I get along, and he hasn't had any problem with anything I've created as long as I don't disparage him. So that is a very good question. I don't have an answer to that. To me, that would be a question you might want to ask an estate attorney, because the problem with inheritance is it's different for every state. And so there really isn't one universal answer, but I would just ask an attorney in your area. Okay. What happens if you don't know who took the photo? Well, in that case, you have some decisions to make. Remember, we talked about 3 things. We talked about copyright. Is it out of copyright? Can you tell that it's out of copyright? Something from the 1890s, is out of copyright. Well, there are some other renewing things, but typically it's going to be out of copyright. If it's in the copyright thing, now you have 2 decisions. Can you get permission if you don't know who took the photo? No, you can't get permission. So then it falls into fair use. Am I using it in a fair use manner? Am I transforming it? Is it, granted, I might be using the whole work, but is the whole project that I'm creating just that image, or is it part of a massive collection of stuff? So then you just go through the fair use and see, how does this apply based on what is stated about fair use? And then you finally have that judgment. What is the likelihood somebody's going to come sue me? If they're going to come sue me, then I need to get some kind of I need to get permission. If they're not likely to sue me, then am I being ethical? Will fair use back me up? And then that's what I would have be your guide. I'm not going to give you a definitive answer. I'm giving you things to think about. Okay, so Paul, there is a comment that I don't understand. I'm hoping there'll be some more clarification, but there are three different time periods of different type of copyrighted material. Many are the time frame you have said, but others are not. Check to make sure. Absolutely. Always check to make sure. But remember, copyright really comes down to, and fair use comes down. Copyright lets you know when you can use it without getting permission, but you're always going to cite it, right? And then after that date, you need to get permission, or you need to make a very, very, very good case that you're using it in fair use. Now, somebody may still have a problem with you. And if that is something that you're concerned about, then I would ask you to make an assessment on whether you want to include it or not. There are some pictures that I really wanted to include in my memoir, and I didn't include it because I wasn't comfortable. I was like, oh, this could be problematic. And so I decided to wait and not include it because it really didn't matter so much to the story that I was trying to tell. It would have been nice to include it. And so that's the things you need to think about with copyright. It is kind of fuzzy, but it all comes down to, when is something in the public domain? Can I get permission? Am I using it in fair use? And once you really start understanding those three concepts, that should be your guide in what you're putting out. Marilyn, it depends. It depends. So 1884, 1848 plus 70 years, you're still probably around that time where it would automatically go into the public domain. But somebody recopies the copyright still retains with the original photographer, even though you recopied it. Having something doesn't mean you own the copyright to it. It really comes down to the photographer has that copyright. And again, go to fair use. Can I use it? Does it fall into fair use, or can I get permission? Okay, so copyright could be a cease and desist if the abuser complies with the conditions of the cease, so there'll be no further issues. And there you go. That is definitely good comfort to you. Cease and desist. So take it off the market, take it out of your book, and then republish it. Edit it out of your video. That's a lot of things when YouTubers come in. They try to use something and they're told you have to take these 10 seconds out of your video and then you're fine, because this is the part that's a copyright violation. Cease and it all depends on what you're trying to use, who has it. Are you falling to fair use and things of that nature? So I hope that I gave you more clarity in terms of the conversations you need to have and the things you need to consider. Okay. Fair use does help a lot because we are doing academic and scholarly work. Fair use. We're going to be talking about how to incorporate things into your books without plagiarizing. That's a video that is filmed. It is not quite uploaded yet. And so that can also give you some more clarity as well. All right. Yes, it depends. It absolutely depends. When in doubt, check it out. When in doubt, get permission. Right? If you don't think you're covered by fair use, then get permission or leave it out. That's really what it comes down to. All right. I hope that was enough for you. We've gone an hour and a half. I love spending time with you guys. We will see you March 16th. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button and then share the heck out of this video with others. I really want to offer more writing videos and serve that need in the community, but I need your help spreading the word. So if you can like this video and share it with others, that would be great. Again, remember the handout. If you're not if you did not receive an email from me earlier this morning, you're not on the email list. If you are on the email list, the handout should have been emailed to you shortly before this broadcast went live. So it should be sitting in your email as we speak, where you can click the direct link to the handout. If you are not on that email list, then go to the description box for this video. You will see how to get the handout. You'll get a first email that says, are you sure you want this handout? And you click the confirm button, and then you'll get a second email, and it will have links to the handouts. So thank you so much from everybody. We're starting to wrap up. Yes, I'm going to be Roots Tech. I'm going to see you at Roots Tech. If you're going to Roots Tech, I will only be there Thursday and part of Friday. So grab me early. I know I'm going to try to head over to the WikiTree booth, but I'm not sure when. Yes, I'm going to have fun at Roots Tech, and my swimmers are preparing for the New Mexico State Finals. We really hope they'll do well, and I'll keep you posted. Can you use obituaries from the newspaper or online funeral book home in a book? Go back to the beginning of the video, and I told you the different criteria you have to meet in order to use a newspaper obituary. If it's before a certain date, absolutely. If it's after, perhaps. And the perhaps comes to, can you get permission, or is it in fair use compliance? If you can get permission and or you can have it follow fair use, then yes, you can use it. If you can't obtain permission, or they don't give you permission, or it doesn't follow fair use, then the answer is a definite no. And then in between is a little bit of gray area, and that's decisions for you to make. There are no hard and fast rules, but there are definitely some guidelines. And so, yes, again, Patricia, it depends. So go back and watch the beginning of the video. Come to understand fair use. If you have more questions, drop them in the comment section, because we're now going to close the chat, and we'll see you next time. Bye, guys.